Awesome. Okay, so welcome. I guess this is probably going to be our last RBdigital users group as it is now. I'll see you all in other users groups and other iterations, but this will be the last one where this group is meeting. So what we need to discuss is just kind of like tying up things for this group. So I just wanted to start with a quick review of sort of where we are and how we got here. Most of you know that Overdrive acquired RBdigital earlier this year. What that means is that RBdigital doesn't exist anymore. Recorded Books exists as a publisher and as a content distributor, but they don't exist anymore as a product that libraries can purchase. It's all Overdrive now. So that was complicated for our group because we already have 2 Overdrive consortium in IHLS territory, and we have members in this group, the RBdigital group, that belong to both of those. So we have some members that belong to one, the Digital Library of Illinois, and we have some libraries that belong to another one called Library on the Go. And then we also have members that belong to our Cloud Library consortium and then other e-resource consortiums. They may have Hoopla, they may have other e-resources that aren't related to RBdigital or consortia at all. So that made it really complicated for us when we found out that Overdrive purchased RBdigital. We had several discussions back and forth with our Overdrive rep. We had another user group you guys may remember earlier in the year where we talked to all of you about what our next step should be. And basically what we came away with was Overdrive would only let this group exist as it is now if we created a new Overdrive consortium with the members of this group. We declined to do that because that would be very confusing for those of you that are in Digital Library of Illinois to have access to 2 Overdrive collections, essentially, one through Digital Library of Illinois and one for this group. And also confusing for members that belong to Library on the Go, because you also would have had 2 collections, basically one through Library on the Go and one through this group. So after many discussions, Overdrive told us that they would allow us to keep accessing RBdigital through our current portal until the end of our contract period. And the end of that contract period is June 30th, 2021. And then we would need to determine how this group would function after that, or what members of this group would do in terms of content. So that's kind of what we're doing today. Does anybody have any questions thus far? And Cassandra can add in anything I may have left out. I think I covered it all.
Yeah, I think you did a great job. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I just want to make sure. So does anybody have any questions, or everybody feels good about that information? Okay, so as of June 30th, probably at midnight or whenever, this group will no longer exist. And I would assume that our content will not be accessible through the RBdigital portal anymore after that. I would guess there might be like a couple days after, however long it takes them to turn it off. But just for our all intents and purposes, you can no longer access eMagazines or eAudio through the IHLS RBdigital portal as of June 30th, 2021. So is everybody clear on that? Okay, so that leads us to our next agenda item, which is what are we gonna do with our stuff? So our RBdigital purchase basically sort of had like 3 prongs. We purchased an eAudio collection that was subscription based. So those are simultaneous use titles. It's a set collection of, I think, around 4,000 titles maybe. Those are just licensed per the year. So basically we pay a subscription fee each year to access those titles. And then each year we renew that subscription. So those after June 30th are just kind of gone. You can also you may be able to, through Overdrive, if you're already in an Overdrive consortium, subscribe to something like that. I know that they were looking at some simultaneous use licensing and titles, but that's something that you would have to do through Overdrive with your Overdrive rep, because we don't have any information on that. The main things that we have to worry about are we have some owned RBdigital content. So that is content that we purchased as a group that we own. So we can sort of do whatever we want with it. It's not very much. It's only about 98 e-audio titles. It was all purchased. I ran the report a few weeks ago as I was prepping for this meeting, and it was all titles that were purchased in 2014, 2015. So we have to decide what we want to do with those titles. We have a couple of options. We can transfer them into Overdrive if they go to the Library on the Go consortium. What that means is that any members in this group who are also in Library on the Go would then have access to them. On my last count, that was about 12 libraries. And that's just where they would go. That's just where they would live. We would decide as a group that that's what we wanted to do with them, and that's where they would go, and they would live on in that collection. Overdrive informed us we cannot do that with Digital Library of Illinois because that group is made up of both IHLS and Rails members. So it's a little more complicated than our Library on the Go group. But that would be a possibility. Our other option is to move them, and I'll explain, it's not really move them, but I'll explain in a minute, into the Cloud Library collection. We could transfer them in there, but that comes with a couple of caveats. As we were talking to our Chris, our biblioteca rep, because it's only 98 titles, and transferring collections from one e-resource vendor to another is really complicated and a lot of groundwork and a lot of paperwork, both for their staff and our staff. Chris didn't really feel like it would be worth it to transfer those 98 titles, to have to fill out a letter that would then go to Recorded Books, to get permission from Recorded Books, to then transfer them to the Cloud Library, to do all the tech work that has to be done to make that happen. But they did offer to let us basically add the highest circing of those titles into our Cloud Library collection at no cost. So they'll just give us a content credit for those titles in that group of 98 that circed the highest, so that we could transfer them into our collection and have access to them. Right now, everybody in the RBdigital group has access to the Cloud Library collection except for 2 libraries. Unfortunately, those 2 libraries cannot have access to the Cloud Library collection because they do not belong to SHARE. And it's Leslie, who's at HSHS St. John's Health Sciences Library, or actually maybe it's 3. Frontier Community College, and I can't think of the other one off the top of my head. So that's something to consider too. But it is a nice offer from Biblioteca because instead of having to repurchase all of those titles, we would be getting a content credit for the ones that have searched the best. And I can tell you, I did run the report and I looked at those circs. And in 2020, in the calendar year of 2020, of those 98 titles, 27 of them didn't get checked out at all, 0. And then it was about 20 to 25 of them that had approximately 10 checkouts or more. And that is what so far Biblioteca has said they'd be willing to add to the collection for us with a content credit for those titles. So we will be like having a vote about that, but does anybody have any questions about just our own e-audio content so far and sort of what our options are? No? Okay, good. Yay, that means I'm doing a good job explaining. So we'll get to this later in the agenda, but like I said, we are just going to have like a vote and let you guys determine what you want to do with that owned e-audio content. There is one other option, and that is we just don't do anything with it, which means it would just go away. It just wouldn't exist anywhere, and that would be the end of it, and we would have gotten what value we got out of it when it was in our collection. So the next thing we need to talk about, the other thing that we got through RBdigital, are the eMagazines. So with the eMagazines, it's always been a yearly subscription to sort of like a package of eMagazines. We used to select certain titles that we wanted to purchase. And then last year we got the RBdigital Unlimited collection, which was a big collection of titles that were all simultaneous use, and then our patrons had access to through the IHLS portal. Those, there's not really anything we can do with them. Overdrive also is offering eMagazines now. So I know that the two Overdrive consortia, Library on the Go and Digital Library of Illinois, have been looking into pricing for those. And I know as of last week, Digital Library of Illinois is going forward with purchasing them for their consortium. And from what I've heard from some of the libraries that are in Digital Library of Illinois, right now it's looking like the fees will be less than what they were paying for RBdigital. I think that Library on the Go was also looking at subscribing to eMagazines, but I don't know if they've made a decision yet or not. So one option you would have is to join one of those Overdrive consortium. And then if that Overdrive consortium is purchasing eMagazines, then you would have access to those. And that is how you would have them for your patrons. They would be available, and I think it's Libby, but I don't think it's the regular Overdrive app, but I'm not sure about that. The other option is EBSCO's product Flipster. They offer eMagazines. They currently offer a 50% discount to IHLS libraries for your first year. There's one title that they can only offer a 25% discount on, and that's Consumer Reports, but everything else, it's a 50% discount. And I do know that when we first were sort of comparing eMagazine purchases, overall, they did seem to be a little bit more affordable than what we had with RBdigital. And Cassandra can speak more to that, but just in general, we could tell that they were a little bit less expensive. And then our third option for eMagazines is that Biblioteca is actually going to be offering eMagazines through the cloud library this year. They actually already have the deal with the eMagazine vendor. It's called Bibliomags, and it's from Canada. And we should have, hopefully, access to a demo app about how that's going to work soon. So the option there really is kind of a wait and see approach. We will be presenting that offer to the Cloud Library Users Group in March. And then after that meeting, that group can have a vote about whether or not they would like to purchase eMagazines through Biblioteca. That one becomes a little bit complicated because we have different library types in that group. So we have schools and publics and academics. And there won't be a way to scope eMagazines like we do ebooks and e-audiobooks. So school libraries, if we get eMagazines through the cloud library, would have access to all those titles, just like a public library would. There wouldn't be any way to sort of limit. And the other trick with that one is, as of right now, because it's a new offering, it's not something that would be offered to individual libraries in our cloud library group. It will be there for all of our group or there for none of our group. So we're going to be presenting sort of pricing and options and titles to the cloud library group in March. We don't have any more information on that just yet because it's kind of still filtering down to us.
And Leslie, it looks like Tina Hubert has a question. Tina, if you'd like to.
Yes, I do. Thank you. So Leslie, that was an awful lot of information. Is there any way that you could actually send us that information?
Yep, I'm sending a fact
I did
sheet.
not get that all written down.
I have a fact sheet after this meeting that lays everything out.
Okay, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
So I was actually going to send it before the meeting, but I felt like because we haven't talked about some of these options before, like that Biblioteca is offering eMagazines. We've talked a little bit about Flipster, but you may not have known about the discount. I was scared that that would be more confusing.
Yeah.
So when I send out the recording link, you will get notes about all this.
Thank you.
And it looks like Jill also has a question. Jill?
Yeah, I thought Flipster we couldn't do as a consortium. Is that incorrect?
You are absolutely right, Jill. Unfortunately, it is library to library, but they do offer an IHLS discount.
Okay, but we'd have to purchase our own individual titles. All right.
Yeah, and it's a
good question.
Good thing, bad thing. So it might actually be less expensive overall because you have to purchase individual titles depending on how many you would want for your library. So good thing is it might be less expensive if you're only getting a couple titles. Bad thing is that it is collection development. You're going to have to put the time and resources because there's no bundled packages, which is really unfortunate.
Right. And then my other question was, and it might be too early to call, but with the cloud readers offering for magazines, in terms of titles and access, like I know that was always a thing with RBdigital. Sometimes you would have a title and then it would become inaccessible and then all of a sudden it would show up in Flipster. And so like, what do we think the breadth and interest of these cloud reader titles are going to be out of the gate?
That's a good question, Jill. From what we've seen from the title list that they have now, it's very comparable to what we had with RBdigital. It's a very large package, sort of like the RBdigital Unlimited package was. So it's kind of like a giant package of many different magazine titles, and then they sort of have a core list of popular titles. I think right now it's, I can't remember, Cassandra, how many popular titles was it? I want to say it was like 100.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And in that core list are a lot of the titles that we had in RBdigital. And then they also have, like RBdigital, what you're referencing, Jill, they also have about 10 titles on that list that they don't have yet, but they expect to hopefully get access to. So like one of those titles was People. So I know that Cloud Library will be offering us weekly, just like RBdigital did, and they're working on People. Because they're working with a magazine vendor that's not Zinio or EBSCO, I do know that the way that they're negotiating is slightly different. So I don't know if that means that they'll have better luck with titles like People or not. But the list, we'll be sharing that at the Cloud Library user group, and it is pretty comparable to what we had with RBdigital.
Okay.
The good thing about the quote that we got from Cloud Library is that the quote that we get, even if they add some of the really more well-known titles, is going to stay the same. So the quote that we have now will be the same as the quote, even if they continue adding on titles. So I thought that that was a very good way for them to offer this service to us as a already having a partnership with them. So I was very pleased to see that they're not going to change our quote if they get like titles like People, for example.
Gotcha. But the downside, again, if I'm understanding this correctly, the downside to this would be that all of the Cloud Library participants would have to agree to go. So, which may not be tenable for those who cost-wise, like if there's a, I don't know, $400 increase in the price or something, you know, then they may not be able to do it. And so then that will probably influence voting, which makes sense. But
yeah, I think that we're going to have to work on some type of an increase scale. So it's not, because we had talked about an across the board increase, which would be about $200 per each Cloud Library user. But that, I mean, that would effectively double rates for some of our smallest libraries for our schools, which is, I think that is going to be a non-starter. So we'll probably take different potential fee distributions to the users group, but it will probably have to be some type of scaled model so that we're not doubling people's fees. Because for the libraries that want magazines, that's great. But if you're a small library that doesn't get a whole lot of interest in eMagazines, then the Cloud Library just became out of reach, which I think that in my mind, which that group might disagree, but in my mind, I think the e-resources access as a whole is much more important than e-resources, e-magazines.
and that makes sense. And that's a very good point of clarification.
I think it would be helpful for a lot of libraries to have as few of resources as possible, so you're not having your patrons to have to go to this, to that, to the other, and so on. So that's, you know, because we're at a point where if we wanted magazines and you went with, oh, the Overdrive's going to do it, we'd have to join Overdrive just to get magazines, and that would, you know, more than quadruple what we already pay for Cloud Library. So just another factor to keep in mind in that you know, a big majority of this group is already participating in Cloud Library. So I think a scaled fee idea is a good idea, because you don't want to price people out of it, but it's also nice to say, hey, we're getting this all in one place.
Did anybody else have any additional questions?
Is there somebody in this group who's library to go who knows a little more about where they stand with talking to Overdrive about magazines in their consortium?
And I will say on the fact sheet, I've listed both those consortium in the eMagazine section, and I do have contacts there for them. So if someone is feeling shy and doesn't want to speak up in front of the group, Jill, you will have an email that you can email. Both of those groups are self-managed, so that's just why I don't have any pricing information, because they negotiate with their rep as they should, and that's how it's done. So I just happen to know about Digital Library of Illinois because a couple libraries in reference to this meeting emailed me and said, oh, hey, I'm doing it through Overdrive, and yay, my price was a little less expensive than what I was paying. So it's basically anecdotal information.
So, and I did speak to one of the members of the libraries on the group, and this was several months ago, but they did express interest and they were working on pricing. And so it seemed like that there was a high interest in moving forward, but I think that that's still in discussion. Any other questions? Okay,
Oh,
Leslie, I'll
hi.
turn it.
Okay, this is Jill Shard from Edwardsville. May I say something?
Yes, of course.
I just wanted to say, so we did join the ECC Overdrive consortium, mainly because we wanted to have the Kindle books available for our patrons. So they did enter into an agreement for the magazines. And for right now, it's based on population. So we're paying $1,200 right now for a year of magazines, of course. So we do have that 6-month overlap with RBdigital, but that was the price that we were given for the magazines. And it is in our current Overdrive app.
Thanks, Jill. And when Jill's referring to the ECC, that's Digital Library of Illinois. It's got Digital Library of Illinois is what the website is called, but the group that manages that consortium is called the ECC. So sometimes I go back and forth and referring to them by name.
Which is formerly My Media Mall, if anybody
Exactly
is tracking that.
I would say though, and magazines are not that easy. I mean, they're still going to change the sorting function, but I mean, it was much easier to look at the magazines in RBdigital as far as when you go into Overdrive right now and you're trying to find magazines, it's not as clear, and also it's not always sorted by most recent and things like that. So they're still trying to work on cleaning up quite a bit of that.
And so that's another, what Jill kind of touched on is another issue with Cloud Library. Of course, we haven't seen the app and we don't know what it's going to look like. I know that they were saying they are working on a Cloud Library 2.0, and they're hoping to have that released in the spring. But of course, with development, the unexpected things, there's delays. And so when I was talking to Overdrive, that was another sticking point, is we're not going to make a decision until we've had a chance to actually see something. And so that is definitely something to consider as we're moving forward. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, Leslie, I'll turn that back over to you.
Okay, so I'll just and thanks for asking that question, Tina, about notes. So I'll just reiterate that I'm going to send out a fact sheet with the recording link to this meeting that sort of details all those options for you guys. And hopefully might come out later this afternoon, but you'll definitely get it tomorrow if you don't get it this afternoon. And in a nutshell, basically we have to figure out what to do with our owned RBdigital content, which are those 98 e-audio titles. So we will be doing a sort of virtual vote after this meeting, and you'll get the link to the survey also with the recording link and the fact sheet, because you guys get to choose what we do with those. It's up to you. And then as far as eMagazines go, at this point, it's kind of an individual library decision. If you're in an Overdrive consortium that's purchasing eMagazines, you may want to purchase them that way, or you may have access to them that way. You may want to look into Flipster, which is offered by EBSCO and offers IHLS libraries a discount for subscribing. That is an individual library sign up. It's not a group purchase, but they do offer the discount. And then our Cloud Library group is going to be examining the eMagazine offer from Biblioteca at their user group next month. So if you're in the Cloud Library, you may decide that you'd like to kind of wait and see what happens there. Although that does give you not very much time to transition patrons that use eMagazines away from RBdigital. So that's something to consider. So the last thing on my agenda was the virtual voting procedure. And like I said, I'm just going to send you a link to a survey and sort of the recap of this meeting with the notes and the recording link. I will also send that list of 98 titles just so you can see them before you vote for what you'd like to do with them. And that's pretty much it. So does anybody have any final thoughts or questions or anything else they'd like to bring up?
This is
before we
Tina.
bid adieu?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Tina.
So has anybody put anything together for us to let our patrons know that RBdigital is going away?
We
Can you
have
hear me?
not. I think mainly because it sort of depends on what your library's doing. So
Well,
I would assume that
RBdigital's
Overdrive has
going
some
away,
resources about. So like if you are in an Overdrive consortium, I'm assuming Overdrive has some resources about magazines. So I can come up with some stuff.
okay, because for us, and I know this is different than everyone else, for us, our patrons only use the magazines out of RBdigital. They're not interested in the audiobook or the ebook. They use other of our resources for that. And we haven't done anything to let them know that it's going away. Now, we don't know what we're going to, but I think it's important to let them know it's not going to be there.
Right. No,
Thank you.
I can create something like that, just a general message about that it's ending and that your local library can tell you how you can access
Thank you.
other e-resources, right? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, yes, thank you very much.
This is Rachel Miller. I would just, Tina, I wanted to kind of like pick up on that thread. We've been thinking about that too. We're exactly like you. We mostly, our patrons don't care about the e-audio. They're checking out the magazines. But I feel like we're in a tough spot right now because we can't tell them what we're going to. So we've postponed this because we're hoping that our Overdrive consortium will pick it up or that Cloud Library will pick it up. So I feel, and Leslie referred to this before too, we're kind of pushing the envelope of figuring out what our next choices are. There's not going to be much time in between, which is not this group's problem. But since Tina brought it up, I thought, well, I'd just like to also say if somebody has thoughts about how to craft a message or has a pre-done thing they're sending out, I think there's several of us in the same boat.
Rachel, I think that's a really good point, but I think that because we don't have the next steps ready yet, because if your library is a Cloud Library member, we've still got to vote on that process. If you were moving to Flipster, it's kind of an easy message to send out saying, oh, we're so sorry, but RBdigital is no longer available. We're going to Flipster that has Consumer Reports and all of the titles, because then it's almost all, I would say that it's probably better to wait and say what we are doing in replacement versus it's ending, but we don't know yet. So it may be May until you're putting out those communications.
I agree. And I know this meeting isn't about Cloud Library, but I would encourage Cloud Library and the other groups that we need to make decisions so that we can start giving our patrons that information.
And Leslie, I know we had talked about a date for the Cloud Library users group. Do we have that set?
Yeah, so the Cloud Libraries users group, I think I just sent out the save the date yesterday. It's the first week in March. And I can find the exact date in a minute. I just don't have it off the top of my head.
Let me look. I think that I have that actually. So I think you sent it to me.
And this is Maria at Mount Zion, and I would have a question when I can ask it.
Go for it, Maria.
Okay, with the RBdigital group, do you know, or can we find out how many of the members are also Cloud Library and possibly Library on the Go members, so Overdrive members? Because I think the dilemma for us is going to be if if we go, if our Overdrive group decides to offer magazines and Cloud Library decides to go, then we're going to have a big overlap. And that's going to be an issue for some libraries because they're going to be paying double for magazines. So is there a way to find that out? How many of us actually overlap?
I do have a list. I can't, everybody in this group, except for those 3 libraries that I mentioned that aren't in share, already has the cloud library. And then I think it was about 12 libraries in this group that were in libraries on the go. And I can't remember how many are in Digital Library of Illinois.
It was about the same. I don't have an exact number, but it's about the same.
I want to say it was like 14.
But they're already offering, from what someone just said, right? ECC is already offering magazines. Yeah. So if they're also in Cloud Library, they may not want Cloud Library to get magazines. I'm just, there's that going to be possibly that dilemma too for some libraries.
I'm going to concur with you on that, Maria. And I was going to say that after you got done speaking. I think that's the real rub here. I mean, like, I'm going to use, for example, somebody like Jill in Edwardsville. You know what I mean? It's like she's already paying for magazines and EEC, and now her fees are probably going to go up and probably proportionately larger because she's a larger library. So if it's on a scale, then she's going to be paying more for these magazines that, yes, maybe her patrons will use in Cloud Library, but she's already paying for somewhere else. So I mean, as a person who would be voting, I could see how Jill would be really torn here, you know what I mean? Because she's now paying for it twice and she doesn't need it twice. And I think that's going to be a very legitimate concern for these people, so.
Well, I will say we have Leslie will probably have the exact number, but around 250 members. The amount that also have Overdrive as a proportion of that is very small.
Yeah, I was going to say that would be the bigger question. Out of the total, how many just have Cloud Library? Because I understand what the Overdrive people are saying, but if we decide, oh, well, Overdrive's getting it, so Cloud Library is not, well, how is that going to affect more people that won't have access? Because it'd be a whole lot more for me to have to sign up for Overdrive when I don't like them to begin with, just to get magazines. So we have, but I agree, we need to look at some numbers to see who's getting the biggest impact. Because even though Overdrive people would see an increase, those of us that don't have Overdrive would have a bigger impact in pricing, because we'd have to subscribe to their basic anyways. And for us, that's almost 3 times what we pay for Cloud Library. Well, no, I take that back, because we pay about $6,000 a year for Overdrive, or we did. How many ever years ago that was? So I'm sure that's way more. So yeah, that's just, I don't want to pay that just for magazines. So.
Right. And so Janet Claire had a note then that they would make the choice to drop Cloud Library. And I think that really either way that you go, there's gonna be a contingent of libraries that are not happy with the decision. And so I think that we're gonna have to focus on greatest good for as many people as we can.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's just kind of the way the timing worked out. We knew when Overdrive bought RBdigital, shortly after that, we knew that, hey, there's now Recorded Books is giving all their content to everyone, and there are going to be more people entering into this sort of eMagazine game. The timing just kind of worked out that this year is when Biblioteca at the start of the calendar year said, hey, we can offer eMagazines. And this is what we're going to be offering. And then also, first of the year is a great time, I'm sure, when Digital Library of Illinois was looking at magazines, and those members of that group that are in this group knew that RBdigital was ending. Hey, this is a great time, especially if you guys got that overlap. So it does, Annette, I don't know Cassandra, if you saw it, but Annette mentioned that March 18th is the Cloud Library meeting. So I was off with my first week of March. I was looking at many dates, and apparently it was not the one that was at the forefront of my mind. So March 18th is the Cloud Library user group. And honestly, we would have had that one sooner, but to talk about the magazines offering, we're hoping by then they'll at least have a demo of the app as it is now. Eventually, like Cassandra said, they're also coming out with the Cloud Library, a new version of the Cloud Library app that would then have everything in it. But for, I think, libraries that are signing up for eMagazines through Biblioteca, like right now, their patrons would be using like a separate app, and then the magazines will go into their Cloud Library app. But since it's a new offering, it's just timing wise, we don't have all that information just yet. I think we'll have it well before June 30th, but like Cassandra said, it might be May before you have a solid decision. Hey, these are the eMagazines we had. This is what we're going to have in the future. Patrons, this is what you need to do. But I'll definitely work on some general language just about RB Digital going away so that we have it. And if you want to start telling patrons that it's going away, you can use it with kind of like a stay tuned or more to come ... following at this point.
And so, and just to reiterate, so everyone understands the process, because we are going to have to submit this for member comment to our user group, and we follow the same rules as share for voting. And so what would happen is it will go to the e-resources committee for discussion, as well as the user group, just to outline what our options are. And then from there, it'll go to member comment, and we'll get that feedback. And at that point, we might have an overwhelming majority say, we're not interested in magazines, and that would be the end of it. If it's the opposite, that people are very interested because they're losing access to RB Digital, for example, and they're not satisfied with Flipster service for whatever reason, at that point, then it would go further into a vote. And so it would be majority of a quorum vote. And so it would only be because the rules had changed, that it's by type now, only Cloud Library participants would be involved in that vote. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions on the process of how that would work? Okay. The e-resources committee, their next meeting is going to also be in March. And so I think that is going to be on the 22nd or the 22nd.
22nd. And then Annette asked, will the message that RB Digital is going away be on the actual platform when the patron goes to look at magazines? I think that I could make that happen, but I'll have to look and see. Because I think there is a way that we can put messages to our patrons. But I have to check and see if what I'm thinking is possible is true. And that's also something I wouldn't do like right now. I hate to further confuse the issue by saying this is going away when you guys are locally saying it is, but we're doing this instead. So we'll just have to be careful with what kind of the language that we use, but I think that is possible, and I'll definitely look into it.
Jill, I see that you have your hand up. Do you have another question?
No, I figured it just went away. All good.
Okay. Anybody else have any additional questions?
Kate has a hand up at Mohammed, by the way.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm here subbing for John because he's on vacation, so that's why I haven't said much. But I do our PR for our library, and I really would not like to see a message saying RB Digital is going away until we're ready to tell our patrons what we're going to. But I just want to throw my voice in for that. I think that would add a level of confusion on our end, and patrons who are unhappy, and then patrons will begin to try to participate in the where should we go discussion. And it's already complicated as it is. I think we still have plenty of time to tell them if we can just wait a bit. So I'd rather not have my hand forced by a message that appears in the app.
Right.
And we will let you all know when we are ready to maybe put something in the app, or we have some communications available. We will certainly let everybody know before that goes out so that if you start getting questions about that, you'll just be prepared.
I mean, we can even, I think we'll just start with general language that we can send out. And then before we put a message on the portal, we can even do like another survey of this group and say, this is the message. Are you okay with it? Or are you telling patrons in another way and you'd rather we not do that? I mean, that would certainly be something easy we could do and would be a quick feedback way for us to talk to all of you and make sure that we're doing sort of what everybody's happy with, or we'll make the transition the easiest.
Leslie, this is Janet Claire. I just had to clarify what I was mentioning about we would no longer sign up for the 3M Cloud. We're with Digital Libraries of Illinois, so we already have access to magazines. I would not want to vote no and prevent the majority of this group from being able to get that with the 3M. So at that point, that's why we would walk away from 3M, is more in the interest of this group than it is for myself. So just wanted to clarify why I said that.
Thanks, Janet. And like I said, I do think for the cloud library group, it's kind of going to be a pretty complicated decision once we get those fee scales, just because it is such a large group and it is kind of all or nothing at this point.
And it is very expensive. I mean,
and it is gonna be a fee increase for everyone across the board. Because there's no other way to pay for it. So we're trying to scale that down as much as we can for some of those smaller libraries, but given the year that we just had with the pandemic and less services being offered and people very worried about budgets and minimum wage increasing, we don't know if libraries will be able to pay for it. And so I can say I've done some fee modeling already. And for some libraries that are in this group, it's looking like it would be less expensive if we did cloud library, if that was the fee model that we used, but for some it will be more. And then there are many libraries obviously in cloud library that have never had eMagazines and are paying kind of basically what they can pay for ebooks at this point. So we're really going to work on those fee models and we're going to see what it comes down to, but it's going to be a pretty complicated vote for that group. Especially this being the first time that it's been offered, which is kind of why me and Cassandra we really have to wait and see because we just don't really know. We don't have a read on how it's going to go. I know lots of people are interested in eMagazine access, but I just don't know if libraries have the budgets to do something new this year. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Do you have a projected time frame where you would like that vote to happen within the cloud library? I mean, I know the meeting's in March, like by the end of March.
Well, Jill, it'll still have to go through committee, and so I'm thinking the earliest would probably be May.
Oh wow. Okay.
And then Tina just mentioned that they've moved funding from print to be able to cover electronic, and that they're not circulating print magazines this past year, obviously, because germs.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions, comments? Okay. Leslie, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, thanks for coming, and thanks for coming to all these user groups over the years. I wish there was an easier way to just transition it all. Like we could just keep this group together and everybody could have access to what they had. But it just didn't turn out that way. So I'll send you guys notes and the recording link and the survey or vote tomorrow, and we'll kind of go from there. And we'll keep in touch too about general language regarding RBdigital disappearing.
Okay, thanks everyone.